So aloha, and how are you doing? Thanks for coming to listen to our review this evening. This is probably the first video review of JSConf Hawaii, so it may end up being found by people who were actually at JSConf Hawaii. Therefore, we're going to do it in English. So we were at the very first JSConf Hawaii in February, just 2 small months ago, and our tan is completely gone by now. I don't know if it was there in the first place, but you know. So this is a very short review of all the JSConf Hawaii talks, as well as an in-depth look at 3 of those talks. And make a note of talks that sound cool to you, because the videos are coming out pretty soon. So yeah. So since we got to go to Hawaii, we did feel some minor pressure from to deliver something back to the company, since it's quite a long way to travel and quite expensive for a 2-day conference. And we actually never thought we would get this approved. So it was a big surprise for us when it was like, okay, you can go. And we were like, okay, let's buy tickets. And then we had to wait a couple of months and then sit 23 hours on a plane. It's actually, so total travel time is actually 27 or 28 hours door to door. It's pretty taxing. You get to be pretty tired. Yeah.
Yeah, so when we finally got to the hotel, we were like incredibly tired and in dire need of a shower. But we checked into the conference and we got our lace. Yeah. So the lace is things we have around our neck. So that's our first impression of the conference, like this Hawaii thing we got. It's actually a plant. We thought it was like rubber or something, but it's actually like a live plant. It's like braided into this thing. So the thing is, this plant happens to smell a lot like sausage. So that's why we call it pölsa. So yeah.
Now, there were a few misunderstandings in the beginning. We misunderstood that the social events planned for the day before, that they were pretty important in terms of mingling. So if you're going far for a conference, arrive 2 days before, not the day before. And it was too expensive to rebook flights and the hotel was booked, so there was nothing we could do about it. So we also misunderstood that the breakfast was in the conference area, so we paid for a rather expensive buffet instead. Hawaii is expensive. Just, yeah, it's like Norwegian prices, basically, so it's sometimes higher. And after that, things started to normalize a little, I think, yeah.
So the JSConf at Hawaii, they had a code of conduct, which they consider very important. And that's good. That's like community engineering. So that inclusion was very important for them, and we thought that was pretty nice. On the environmental aspect, the organizers wanted to be like environmentally conscious. For example, by taking the delay that we got and returning it back to Earth afterwards. However, there were a lot of plastics there. Like every time there was a meal, we used like one-time plastic knives and forks and stuff like that. So I don't know how sustainable that is to use that much plastic. Yeah. So yeah. So for the program, the conference was a single track. They had an overflow room, which was very nice. They had several breaks in between the talks. They had very nice food. There was a very good flow. The ordering of the talks was very nice. There was a mix of introductory talks and advanced topics. There was a mix of different domains, like there was JavaScript, there was design, there was community, there was a talk about moon phases, there was serverless, and there was like general nerdiness. That was very good.
Yeah, I think you're up first.
Yeah, so we're going to go through each talk, just short, like just mention each and every talk. This is also like the live transcription they had during the talk, which was also a very nice feature they had.
And there was a pretty fun thing there where this guy talking, he was one of the hosts and he was actually Hawaiian. And his name is pretty hard for the transcriber to say. So I don't know if you can tell, but it says, "My name is indiscernible." I know it's difficult to say. So yeah. That's actually an npm package doing the transcribing. So this is you can ask us more about that afterwards if you want.
Okay, so the first talk was Carl Oba. He had a talk called Hi and I, like that's how I and AI. So he had an interesting talk about using powerful technology for surveillance and facial recognition and stuff like that, and the ethics surrounding it. So they had this experiment where they set up an exhibition where you were taking a picture of when you're entering, and your face was classified according to these algorithms. So this is an example of that. So this is like guest number 9. And so this is stats from analyzing that picture of one of the guests. And the numbers are likelihood of the guests in that image having that attribute in percentage. So for example, you can see that it says like attractive man, 70%. Attractive woman, 50%. So that's kind of interesting. And then it's like, on the other side, you can see like chubby, 8.9%, like for having that attribute. So there was also this like big license agreement posted on the wall that said that they could do basically whatever they want for the information they gathered about their guests, which was meant to be provoking, but a lot of visitors didn't read the text on the wall, so they didn't like catch that part of the exhibition. So that it kind of didn't work. So the idea behind it was to make people question the technology and use it.
Next topic was by Vishnu Pityanuat. He told a story about how he created software that could see the cards in the set game and find sets as fast as possible in real time. The talk finished with a live demonstration, and he also played a song on the ukulele. And we had to actually show his bio from the JSConf page. It was hilarious. Vishnu has dropped 2 production databases in his computering career. And it ends with, if you're ever bored and you would like to see his face, run npm Vishnu P. So we try to do that. Yeah. So his face is on all your computers in pixels.
The next talk was a guy called James Halliday, and he had an interesting talk about using technology to help indigenous people in South America. So the story is that when politicians decide what to do with a piece of land, they look at a map, and that map is empty. So they think that there's nothing there. And Halliday is creating a community collaborative map where locals can plot all the different resources that exist in an area. That's not on a normal map, either because it's not updated or because the resource is transient, right? It comes and goes, for example, or it moves around. So this is how it looks from far. So things that could be put on a map are, for example, settlements, sacred sites, local doctors, people with cell phones, hunting grounds, wildlife, etc. So this information can be used by locals to find resources, or when negotiating with the government that wants to use the area for something else. So they can say that, okay, you want to use this area to build something, for example, or to do mining or something. But it contains all these things that we need, that the local community is actually using. So
that are not on Google Maps.
So not on Google Maps, yeah. So recording and uploading information in the field is some of the practical challenges that he had to face. And using peer-to-peer technology helps solve those problems. That's what he was talking about. So it was an interesting talk about very practical uses of technology.
Andres Cuervo held a talk about visual technologies that has entered the web platform, such as WebGL. There's also augmented reality and virtual reality, and how you can access those features. This is all coming to the web. He talked about the API for this, and it has been named WebXR. And it combines AR and VR and even more types of input, like voice and gestures. So this should all be available on the web, well, quite soonish. So you can think about how you want to gesture to your computer soon, or to your websites. There's a lot of interesting technology available that opens up a lot of interesting possibilities. And he would like to see us programmers spend more time exploring these opportunities than we have and experiment some more, because there aren't a lot of experiments with WebXR yet.
Okay, so the next speaker was Olivier Jack. He had a very interesting and very fun talk about a project, Hydra. So that's a project that turns a browser into what she calls a modular networked video synthesizer. So the idea is to take input from different sources and combining them to create new images. And the sources can be code that transforms its input, or it can be a webcam, or a microphone, or even someone else's webcam that comes from the internet. So the inspiration behind it is that a website is not really like a site somewhere, it's everywhere. So anyone should be able to come together with anyone to collaborate and create things over the internet. So we're going to try, like she had a great demo of this during her talk, but we're going to try to do a little bit.
I'm just going to mirror this place.
Please hold while we fix.
There we go. And you go.
Cool. So, if you want to find a project, you can just search for like GitHub Olivia Hydra. Hold on. Okay, so the first hit there is like from GitHub. So then you can see, this is the actual project, like the source code, when she talks about this. Yeah, excellent. So yeah, set of tools for live coding network visuals inspired by analog model synthesizers. These tools are an exploration into using streams of the web for routing video sources and outputs in real time. So to see this in action, you can go up here. So this is the site where this is in production. So here you can see behind us we have all this fancy stuff going on, and looking kind of trippy here. So the code on the side here is what actually decides this, and you can see it takes a mouse. This example takes a mouse position as input, which is why I can like just move this and move everything else. So we can like change this, for example, with like a 3 here, for example, and do something like this, and then it changes, right? So this is just like the code on the side here. Okay, that didn't do much. So up on the top side here, you can press this button and you get a random new kind of thing. So they have like different examples that you can check out. So it's pretty cool. And all of this is just the code up here to create this at the bottom here. If I, for example, I'm gonna try this. If I do this, for example, it suddenly looks like this. It's like, oh my god. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So this is one thing that we want to try out. I need your help with it.
Yeah.
So like if I do, is it like there or?
Oh yeah, we gotta go out and grab it.
I would memorize all this code, but I can't do that. So okay, so I got all this excellent code here. So this, she actually like demoed a lot of this, but she did it live. Oh, wait, look at this. So okay, so what it's doing here is that it's creating this thing up on the top left corner, up here, and then it's taking the video input from the cam, and it's like combining it to this thing up on the side there. So so it's pretty cool. It's pretty like trippy, and it's fun. And it's like, what's the practical use of this? Does it need to have a practical use? It's just fun, right? We're just having fun with this. So when you look at this, you're probably thinking, yeah, this looks kind of, maybe this should be like some music or something. And turns out there's this thing, there's a community on the web that has this thing called algoraves. So algoraves are like parties where people create music from algorithms. Not like a DJ, but they're like writing algorithms to create music. So the Hydra project from Olivia is a perfect match for that. So so if we do this, we can say like, instead of just having, where's the one?
There we go.
One. Yeah. Instead of just having like the music, so this one is recording. It's very dark, but this one is a recording where Olivia is making the graphics by using Hydra, this project on the left side, and you can see the code there. And then on the right side, someone is like making the music for this as it like live, like just coding the music. And then people can just like have a party and have fun. So that's like an algo rave. So this is like sub-community of people like doing this stuff, and I thought it was just awesome. So it's just a fun thing. So yeah. So now you know what you can do this weekend. You can just like find your local algo rave and go there. Like yeah. So there's also
yeah, should I? Yeah.
There's one more thing. Just like on this page, you can do like there's a button here, and you can press it in order to. You should be able to press it. It didn't.
Yeah, maybe I have like a blocker or something.
Oh, okay.
That's a thing. Yeah,
Oh,
I do.
okay.
Yeah, some extensions blocking it.
Yeah.
But
So there's a Twitter feed. You're supposed to be able to press it, and then you can like upload things automatically to Twitter. So there's a Twitter feed called Hydra Patterns, and here you can just like see stuff that people have uploaded, and it just links to the editor with the source code, so you can then get the stuff that people made, and then you get the source codes, you can change it, and you can build on this. So it makes it very collaborative. So yeah, so that's the Hydra project.
Cool. Yeah, we could show this quickly, I guess.
Yeah, that's when she did the live demo. She made like this different kind of filters and stuff live. Did a lot better job than I did. So, yeah.
That was really cool. So next up was Anna Watt. She talked about having remote work essentially, and she talked about having working sessions instead of meetings. So she talked about how a company can make it easy to have remote workers and distributed teams, and how some companies actually use remote working as a perk that you kind of have to earn. And her argument was that this was a completely wrong way to go about this. That instead of thinking about remote working as a privilege, you should just create really good tooling for it so that it becomes easy. Yeah, she had like tons of really good and practical tips to how you should do tooling for remote working sessions, like virtual whiteboards and always having video links to meetings and make it easy to join remotely. And there was this good point that you should treat it like you are at the office. So when you come in, you say good morning on Slack and stuff like that. So you make it like you're there. Try to make it like you're there.
Next speaker was William Martins. He talked about some TC39 proposals while entertaining us with some lovely graphics accompanied by some very appropriate sound effects. So we can't like recreate that here, you have to be there. But it was very entertaining, very nice slides. Sean Wang was next one. He had a presentation where he explained how we can use Babel as a tool for a code base beyond just the out-of-box plugins. The Babel macros is a simple way to write and use Babel transformations, basically. So Babel macros allows you to have Babel transform your code when you explicitly import the macro instead of like always, which is the case when you use the Babel plugin. So you have much more control over the transitions that Babel is doing, and it gives you compile time errors instead of runtime errors, which is what a Babel plugin would give. Or might give. So he had this talk where he demonstrated by creating his own Babel macro. You can have, in his case, he had Babel like automatically create GraphQL queries based on what the other code he has written in his project. So he didn't have to write them explicitly. So it's very interesting, and it's Babel macros is basically a much easier way to create and use Babel plugins, basically.
Next up was Brie Bunch, or her nickname being Airbnb. She was a popular speaker at JSConf Hawaii. She gave a brief introduction into TypeScript and talked about Airbnb's experience with introducing it at scale. And she talked about their transition and what kind of tips and tricks they use to make it go as smoothly as possible across teams. It was worth mentioning that Airbnb makes TypeScript definitions for lots of packages that are available as Airbnb-types on NPM. So check it out if you use TypeScript a lot. So this presentation was really great and it was well executed and visually superb. So if you're into TypeScript, definitely check it out.
Next one was like Lynn Clark and Till Schneiderite. They had this massive talk about WebAssembly. They talked about its history, its present, its future. They went into detail about all the features that WebAssembly has, which turns out is quite a lot. I mean, I didn't know this beforehand. So the first version of WebAssembly was basically just an MVP, minimal viable product. And future versions will have lots of optimizations, as well as a lot more features, like, for example, being able to access all the JavaScript API. So this was a technically heavy presentation that was very interesting to try to follow.
Matteo Collina had a talk where it demonstrated how you can visualize asynchronous code execution. So apparently one good way to do this is with bubbles and circles. And we won't go into detail about this, but you can see the talk on video if you want to. But by using visualizations, it demonstrated how you could debug serious performance problems in your I/O code in Node. It was pretty impressive.
Next one was Stamira Vlaeva. Hopefully correctly. She was the last speaker of the first day. She had a very thorough talk about using the V8 JavaScript engine on Android and explained how it works. So, yeah.
The after party after the first day was at the Honolulu Zoo, and there was food and critters, and it was an alcohol-free, family-friendly event. So nice place to bring your better half. Our better halves were off drinking mojitos instead. So there's that. We found this humongous tree, which we got to mention this. It was really fascinating. The way this tree grows, its branches is not bottom up; it's top down. So it grows out, and the branches go down to make a stability for a new branch, and drag up water. Yeah, super cool. There were pelicans and these handsome fellows. We tried the poi, the traditional Hawaiian pasty food. Cannot recommend it. Sorry, internet. Yeah. So day 2 begins.
Yeah. So this is the overflow room, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's like if you can't get a seat in the main room, or if you just want to have a little more relaxed atmosphere, you want to maybe talk with people or something, then you can go here instead and just watch the presentation and hear it live. And you can see the back, there's like drinks and stuff, and often there was food. So it was a very nice atmosphere there.
So Hilary Stoss-Krause had a talk about basic UX for programmers. And she said, quote, "We know more than we think we do." She had many interesting examples about good and bad design, and had very specific advice for do's and don'ts. For example, studies show that even with labels, only 80% of users actually understand what a button with a label and an icon really does. And if you take away the label, that becomes far, far worse. So having labels on buttons should definitely be the default. You need a reason not to do it. She explained results from testing of what people actually looked at on a web page, which you can see on the heat map on the left. And as you can see, people view web pages in kind of an F-shaped pattern. And this can really help guide you to where you should put your input components. She mentioned like lots of interesting things, like studies that show that big and small letters combined, like in a sentence, are actually easier to read than only lowercase and only uppercase, because our brains are trained to read lowercase and uppercase straight and ignore it faster. So if you want to learn something, you can actually just mix up the casing, and then you'll probably learn it better because your brain has to use more effort reading it. So yeah, studies also found that most people are well trained to ignore content between paragraphs of text because they expect it to be advertisements. So it was a very informative talk. Lots of cool tips.
Amy Vibo, she had a visually superb presentation. It was really nice about how you calculate moon phases using JavaScript. So she explained all the math behind it in detail. And I would also like to say that this talk contradicted that the Earth is flat. Apparently, I have to say that now in 2019. So yeah. So apparently, it's not flat. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Yes, I do now. Louisa Barrett, she had an introduction to color theory, and she used Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to explain colors in detail, and which worked surprisingly well. Like, seems like a weird thing to do, but a lot more thought goes into colors than I realized. So that was actually very nice, a very nice talk, and it wasn't like gimmicky. It was kind of like it made sense to like. There's a lot of color theory that I had no idea existed. So it was very nice. She also talked about color accessibility. So this is how the turtles would look if you're, I think, green and red colorblind or something. And so she talked about that, and she also did some examples of how we can help people with colorblindness to use your site.
Yeah, that's also you.
That's also me. Yeah, Crystal Martin is the next one. So she had an entertaining introduction about the different types of asynchronicity in JavaScript, including how they work and specific code examples. She used analogies from real life to explain the different concepts, which work very well. So this is very like beginner basically, like for so just an introduction to these things, to those who don't know them. At the end of the talk, she finished off very nicely by talking about inspiration and how she writes talks with help from others and how she writes them also by herself. So it was all in all very nice.
Following the talk about async in JS was a deeper dive into the possibilities of asynchronicity. So Jen Creighton held a talk about using coroutines as event loops. Her example code was a recreation of her beloved Tamagotchi, just on the web. And I just recently felt like I got a good grasp of ES6 generators, so coroutines was completely new territory for me. So we thought we'd teach you about coroutines as well today. So a coroutine is just a looping generator function that is performing some task, like an animation. And it may wait for input as well. So it's a good choice for the main event loop in a game, where you can tell the coroutine, like, here, run this game loop, and it will run along and do its thing while also accepting input. So in this example, we can see that we instantiate the generator function. Where const tester equals test. And then we call the first next in order to get down to the first yield. From there, the generator function accepts input when we call next. So a proper coroutine would typically have like a while true or something to keep it running. So we usually do want to start with the first yield keyword. So we can make a wrapper coroutine for this. And please raise your hands if you have questions along the way, because this is pretty cool if you understand it. So it's very important to note that the first next goes to the first yield. And that's kind of the point. That's where the coroutine should start. So a coroutine wrapper looks like this. It takes our generator function as an argument, as its first argument, and it instantiates that function. And then calls the first next to get to the first yield. And then it returns a function which accepts input to the next, the next time we call it. But without the need to actually type .next, because it is done inside the return function. So the coroutine wrapper does not do anything special. It's just a convenience. However, when you have this, you can do stuff like this. This is what the result looks like, where we pass our generator function, the function star, into the coroutine wrapper. After that, we can simplify the code below to use the coroutine as something that lives in parallel to the main thread. And we can call that coroutine as shown. So far, our coroutine will die after we call it twice, because it then it runs out of stuff to do. So let's take this a step further and make a coroutine that lives alongside the rest of your application and can do stuff for you. So here we have the same structure of code, except we've added a while true in there. So this coroutine will stay around and can be called whenever you want to tick or talk. And that's pretty much all there is to it. It's this simple, or not simple. But let's simplify the bit below there, because we don't want to manually tell the clock to tick or talk. So there, we use a set interval instead. That's better. Now we call our coroutine every second and ask it to tick or talk. Now it seems it's actually pretty easy to add state to your coroutine. You can just add a variable above the while true, and it will stay completely encapsulated within the coroutine. It's also easy to stop the coroutine from the outside by clearing the interval, or from the inside by adding some condition. And you can restart the coroutine after you clear the interval. It's simply done by doing set interval again, unless it has been garbage collected, of course. So another cool pattern that fits well with coroutines is using them as event loops. So here we again instantiate the coroutine, and then we can send event objects from both a mouse down event, a mouse move event, and a mouse up event straight into the coroutine as an argument. And the coroutine even manages its own event state machine. So you have to first send a mouse down event before you can send a mouse up or mouse move event. So this is quite a nice way to deal with responding to multiple event types for a single element, instead of having to write 3 different event listeners. You just have a single coroutine and you use it for all those events. So we know some things in JavaScript lead to callback hell. And we thought promises could solve all this, but that just leads to thenable hell, which is just a flatter version of hell. So yeah, everyone laughed at JSConf at that joke. So async await is really nice and makes JS far easier to read. But every now and then you could benefit from using a coroutine to write code that runs sequentially, or at least appears to run sequentially, unless you use a web worker. If you think this is interesting, we strongly recommend you watch the talk from JSConf when it gets published soon.
All right, excellent. So the next one was Konstantin Reier. He talked about the React performance optimization at Facebook. And as you can see, there were some topics that he could talk about, but where he was not allowed to show code examples because of his employer. So it's censored. But for the most part, he showed out a lot of different examples, and it was very interesting how they're optimizing React code. So for example, he talked about how they optimize for perception by, for example, first rendering a non-functioning mockup and then swapping that mockup out for real working React components after getting code and state ready. So they do all this in React. So very interesting.
At this point in the conference, there was a live broadcast in the form of a panel debate hosted by JS Party. Because there was a talk cancellation, the panel debate with JS Party got extended. We didn't actually pay much attention to this because we wanted to mingle with the other participants since we missed the day, the first day, the mingle day. The talk about the art of code comments by the well-known Sarah Drasner was the one that was cancelled. This was a pretty big blow for us because we really wanted to see that talk. But we popped by her blog and noticed her speaker schedule, and it made our head spin. So she's really busy with speaking events, and it was probably a well-deserved break, even though she was under the weather.
Okay, so Emily Kearney had a talk about unconscious bias in the IT business. So she talked about knowledge gained through many studies and how unconscious bias affects people that are struck by it. So she said that it is important to recognize your own biases so that you can do something about it. She had this analogy, a bowling metaphor, where you can imagine that hitting the pins is inclusion, and then you can have like policies, then they become like kind of like guide rails, so it becomes easier to hit the pins. So unconscious bias is real. For example, people aren't getting jobs because of disabilities, even though the disability would not hinder their work. So the solutions are real as well, and we all have to do our part.
Trish Ang from Slack talked about accessibility. She talked about how the DOM structure is important for screen readers. At Slack, they treat accessibility bugs as broken functionality, which are product blockers, which means you can't release. So she had a quote where she said that the average user is a myth. She talked about 4 types of accessibility. There was color contrast, Zoom UI, keyboard navigation, and screen reader support. And she had a very interesting demonstration of screen readers on content from popular sites, where the audience would guess where the site was, which site it was from. It was a difficult and fun exercise. It was a very well executed presentation, actually.
Next one up was Garth Hansen. Where did all my servers go? He had to talk about cloud computing, also known as serverless, but he didn't like that term. So he explained that you're getting functionality and you're reducing costs at the expense of higher complexity. So for example, you have a monolith code base, and you go from that to microservices, and you go from that to Lambda functions. And at each step, you add more complexity. So yeah, he talked about that, and he talked about different Amazon Web Services and the features that they have. And next one is Thais Korea. She had to talk about how you design GraphQL API via domain-driven development, and that they're a good fit for each other. So to quote her, she said, GraphQL gives product teams superpowers by letting them focus on their domain and not their data. So she explained that complicated is not the same as complex, because complicated means you can split something into smaller parts, while complex means you can't. So the best you can do with complexity is to try to manage it properly. For example, don't create a GraphQL schema that maps one-to-one with the database, since you're then most likely dumping the complexity onto the client. So it was a very interesting and well-made talk.
The last talk was from Jessica Lord. And you can't tell, but I'm a little starstruck right there. So raise your hand if you know that you use Electron on your computer. Yeah. And now the rest of you can raise your hands anyway, because you all use Electron on your computer. Electron powers Spotify's desktop client. It powers Slack's desktop client. It powers Atom. It powers VS Code. It powers the hyperterminal by Site. These are all made with Electron, and Entur's Salg og Service app, desktop client, is made with Electron. And I cannot overstate the importance of this. Electron would not exist without Jessica. So all these apps that we use every day are based on technology that exists because of her. So we got to talk to her quite a bit about working at GitHub and about Electron and equality in the workplace and life in general. And she's such a nice person. She held a talk about team engineering and how you engineer a good team and keep the team funded and alive in order to do something that can have a profound positive effect on the world, even though it may primarily be a cost center for your company. Now, we won't go into the details of the team and engineering part, no, team and community engineering part, but we will look at some other parts of her talk. So Jessica worked at GitHub at a time where Atom was being introduced. And for those who don't know, Atom was just a small passion project for the founder of GitHub. He kind of always wanted to do a code editor, but he was kind of busy building, GitHub. And then in the time where people like me used TextMate and Sublime and other people used Vim and Emacs, GitHub finally launched Atom, which was the perfect compromise between usability and extensibility. And you probably know Atom, so we won't go into that. Anyway, when the Atom team wanted to ensure that Atom could be a multi-operating system desktop app, they contracted a guy to build Atom Shell. This was a set of open source bindings that allowed a Node app with application windows to use more native features of the operating system. So, however, other apps saw the benefits of Atom Shell too, for example, Visual Studio Code. So the Atom team decided that it's silly to have Atom Shell powering stuff like VS Code, so they decided to rename it to Electron. Because an electron is part of an atom, right? So that's where that name comes from. So this was back in 2015 when Spotify still made separate clients for each operating system for Souls. Now, converting Atom Shell to something made by a contractor to something that is full size and called Electron, that was tremendous work for them, obviously. And GitHub did not fully appreciate this cost center because for them, it didn't drive profits. So Jessica, she told us differently, but let's just say that she fought with tooth and nail to ensure that the Electron team had a few engineers and a budget. And there was a high degree of randomness and a quite messy story. So it's amazing that it turned out to be the platform that we all know today. Without Jessica, it certainly would not have become the Electron we know. So at the Electron team, Jessica worked a lot with how to make Electron apps approachable so that it would appeal to the masses. So there's no use in making a cool developer tool if no developers like your documentation. A lot of startups that makes dev tools have died this exact way. So this is absolutely vital. So she created the Electron demo app, and she created significant documentation that had figures and easy to approach examples and simple language. And this accessibility helped make Electron as popular as it is today. So they got to Electron 1.0 with a 4-person team, and they got their own GitHub org away from Atom, and she did admit that Electron is pretty heavy on the CPU. But anyway, check out her site, jlord.us, where you can find Essential Electron. This is a site that attempts to explain Electron as simply as possible. And Jessica's way of talking about this was pretty fascinating. She wants everyone to change the way they talk about code. Like use more figures, use simple language, don't clutter documentation, and use local documentation in the source. That was very important. Yeah, and several other really good practice points. This all plays into a topic, which was team and community engineering, an essential part of making a popular tool. So she said documentation should live in the source code. Now, why was this? Her points about this was really interesting. So number one, you want a single source of truth for a product, right? So the documentation should live with the product itself. Number two, if the documentation lives in the repository, like the Electron repository, everyone gets a copy when they fork or clone the repository. So if you fork the project, you get the documentation. Number three, local docs should live in the respective subfolders, like /electron, /some-module, /docs. And number four, every release of the system will contain that version's documentation. And this last point was incredibly powerful, yet quite simple. So eventually, though, some leader somewhere in GitHub decided to downsize the Electron team. So this leader decided to tell Jessica to switch to another team because he thought she weren't an engineer. And that was just plain wrong, and Jessica felt quite flattened. And after a bunch of drama, this leader finally agreed that, okay, yes, she was an engineer. However, it was too late to revert the move, so she had to move anyway. So Jessica did what any sane person would do. She quit the company. So she wanted to work more with women anyway. And telling a female engineer that you don't think she's an engineer, that's an effective way to lose all your female engineers. So, don't do that. Now, if this leader should ever watch this, you made a serious mistake. The reason I feel strongly about this is not just because of the injustice, but because Jessica and the Web Rebels team held a Node.js workshop for NTNU students in Trondheim several years ago. So I feel like Jessica taught me Node. And Jessica, if you watch this, and you need a job in Oslo, just come to Knowit. We'll pay you double what I make.
All right, so finally the program had reached the end, and the lovely organizers hoped everyone would join in next year. And they couldn't even hold back the tears, so I guess we have to go next year then.
Yeah, definitely.
So, very nice. So if you're watching this on the web, and you were at JSConf Hawaii, then mahalo for the 2 days and fun at Waikiki, and we hope to see you again. So, there we are, right there.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
We didn't pay attention when they were like, "Hey, everyone, we're gonna take a picture."
So yeah, so we have the verdict of the conference was like a 5 out of 6. Very tough verdict. The good thing, high quality talks, diverse talk topics, easy to talk to the speakers. Information flow is good. Overflow room is great. Graphic profile was a lot of fun. It looks great. Sausage, that was great. Inclusive environment, good vibes, cool effects. Location. Very good location, gotta say that. That's excellent. So scored good on that one.
Yeah.
Not so good. It was a single track, and some of the talks were like introductory, and we would prefer to have like a beginner track and an advanced track so that we can skip the introductory stuff. Some of the talks were a little bit too far removed from JavaScript, so those weren't that interesting for us. A little bit too much plastic, like the EU is outlawing single plastic items or single-use plastic items in 2020, I guess. And it would be nice. I don't know how they recycle things at Hawaii, but there wasn't any recycling like bins there or anything. It was just like throw everything here. So I'm not sure how if they're recycling or how that is. But it would be nice to see like if they could use like the stuff from the. I mean, we're at a hotel. Maybe they could use the normal plates and stuff from the restaurant at a hotel, for example, or something like that to make it a little bit less plasticky. And also the internet service on Hawaii generally isn't the best we've seen. I mean, maybe that's logical. It's an island in the middle of the Pacific. But yeah. So yeah. That's the verdict.
If you all thought this looked rather enjoyable, then go to JSConf.com and find yourself a conference with tickets on sale right now or an open call for speakers. Then you can be as happy as these two Knowit people on the first row. If you so yeah, and mahalo for your attention.